accidente, etc.
Thrill me.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Horror Flakes and Guitar Fix podcast. I'm your host, Tim, and today I'm joined by the one and only Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, from the show True Crime with Bratterstein. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing awesome. Stoked to have you on the show. Of course, mentioning your show. Do you mind telling the people about it? Where they can find it?
Oh, yes. So I have it. It's primarily on YouTube, but we have branched out recently to podcast form. So it's on Spotify, basically anywhere where you get podcasts, you can find me. And I cover true crime cases every week, every Monday, from the point of view of somebody who's experienced homicidal violence in their life. So that's the position I come from, trying to have people remembered who are no longer here with us.
Oh yeah, no, definitely a good reason to get into that type of stuff. You know what I mean? So that's awesome. And I found you when you made the jump to Spotify because at first I was like, oh, it's a new show. I really enjoy this. And then I was like, oh, she's not new at all. She's been around for a while doing this. So
Yeah, we just started on Spotify the last maybe the last year about. I think
yeah.
we started at the beginning of last year.
No, yeah. And you've even covered some stuff that's kind of true crime in the music world. And that's what led to me, actually reaching out to you and asking you to be on the show instead of just, sitting on the outside as a fan. And I was like, when you did the episode on Tim
Tim
Lambesis and then,
Lambesis, I knew.
yeah, that one. And then, of course, George Harrison as well. I didn't even know about that. Like, of course, I knew about the Tim stuff, but
Yeah, I didn't know about the George Harrison thing either. And when I found out about it, I was like, why is nobody why have I never heard this before when you've heard, obviously about John Lennon um everywhere. Everybody talks about John Lennon being murdered. I was surprised that nobody had talked about George Harrison's attack.
yeah. Now, I've always thought that there's like this big weird connection too between John Lennon and like just the Beatles, Rosemary's Baby, and like the Charles Manson stuff because of them hanging out with like Prudence and Mia Farrow and stuff, and then him dying at the same hotel that movie was shot at, and I don't know, there's just so many weird like instances and stuff. So
I don't think I've ever heard about that. I'm gonna have to look into that.
yeah, like of course the Dakota where John Lennon was killed is the same hotel that they shot Rosemary's Baby. And then
Hmm.
Mia Farrow at the time, of course, Mia Farrow that was in Rosemary's Baby was Roman Polanski, I think was filming Rosemary's Baby when the whole Charlie Manson stuff happened, so and then he used Helter Skelter. So there's just so many weird connections between all of it. So
Yeah, John Lennon, or not John Lennon, wow. Charles Manson really wanted to be a famous musician. That was like his goal, and when that
yeah.
didn't work out, he decided to do things that were a lot worse.
Yeah, his songs are pretty rough, that's for sure.
Yes.
I think I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about the movie Mandy, but they were comparing the music of the cultists in the movie Mandy to Charles Manson. So
Mhm.
they played some Charles Manson stuff, and it was like him talking about the trash man or some shit. I was like, what the hell?
He's a crazy person for sure.
Yeah, but hell yeah. Growing up, would you say that your like, interest in true crime and all that came before your interest in horror, or would you say horror came a little first, or was it kind of all just came at the same time?
That's a good question. I'd say that horror definitely came first. Well, I'd say that I had more exposure to horror at a young age than true crime. I definitely saw some Lifetime movies that were inspired by true crime stories. Like I've covered a couple of those. But no, horror was definitely where it got started. I actually don't prefer horror movies that are more based in reality that seem like true crime case, like Eden Lake, for example. I don't know if you've seen Eden Lake,
Yeah.
but that's one I never want to watch again because it feels too real. I like it to be more ridiculous when it comes to horror. So I keep them a little bit more separate in that way. But I think I've definitely been a horror fan longer than I've been interested in true crime.
Oh yeah. And I definitely understand that. There's like a meanness to some of those like more realistic ones that you can kind of get rid of in, a zombie film or, pretty much anything else, Cabin in the Woods type deal or something. So
Yeah, even slashers, like even though they are a person, it still doesn't feel as real as some of the more grounded in reality ones do, for sure.
no, I definitely agree. Like you got Maniac, of course, which feels very realistic, but then you got Friday the 13th, where of course, by the fourth and fifth one, there's people getting their heads slammed into, well, in the sixth one necessarily to be specific, people are getting their heads slammed into trees that have smiley faces on it and making blood smiley faces and stuff. So
Exactly, exactly.
yeah, it definitely makes the camp. Or he's slashing people that are doing handstands right down the crotch, so it always just there's something to take the
Oh,
seriousness
got a
out of
little
it.
frozen
So,
there.
but
Yeah, absolutely.
hell yeah. Do you remember the moment that you got into horror movies and some of the first ones that you had seen growing up?
I was thinking about that today when I was like, okay, we're going to be talking about horror movies, and I started trying to think of what the like genesis was for me, and I think the first one that really the one it's my favorite movie of all time. It's Scream, the original Scream. I think
Oh
that's the
yeah.
first one I saw that really stuck with me, or at least influenced my personality. Because the first one I can like quote the entire movie by heart, but I also remember me and my mom going to like a Blockbuster or a Hollywood Video and renting every Halloween movie that was available at the time and watching them all back to back until we were done. It probably lasted like 2 or 3 days, and not appreciating number three as much as a kid as I do now because I was like, "Where's Michael Myers?" And now I love it. But those are the two things that stick out in my head as like the influential moments is seeing Scream for the first time, which stuck forever, is still my favorite, and then all the Halloweens.
Hell yeah. No, that's kind of two of the big ones for me. The Halloween franchise, mostly just because they had it on the AMC Fear Fest all the time growing up. So those were the ones that were always cycling throughout the month of October on the either AMC channel and sometimes Sci-Fi. So I watched a lot of Halloween 4 and 5 because they just put those two on a
Oh
lot. But
yeah.
and then three was one I'm obviously a fan of. I got the three masks behind me and stuff, but it was one that I completely just ignored as a kid because everybody told me, you don't have to watch it. So I didn't ever have like a dislike for it, but I just never even like gave it the time of day until I was an adult, and I was like, "Holy shit, what was I missing?" So I'm right there with you on that one. But
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when
Scream
I
is,
saw it when I was a kid, I was just like, I didn't get it. And then I rewatched, I believe it was last year, maybe the year before in October. I was like, I'm going to watch them all again because I haven't done that in such a long time. And I was like, this is actually so rad. And I was at, I don't know where you live, but if Ross is a thing, it's a store that has a lot of like random things that you can find. And I was there and I found the figurines with the mask is like a kid's toy. And I got it for my son and he loves it. It's like his favorite little toy. So he has all three of the characters that he plays with all the time.
oh yeah, that's rad. No, I think I've seen those little NECA figures that was like a three
Mhm.
pack of them and stuff. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
No, Scream is my favorite horror movie as well. My favorite movie is Back to the Future, but like as far as horror goes, Scream is my favorite horror movie, and it's kind of the same thing. It was one of those first ones that showed me horror could be fun, not just scary and stuff like that. Because again, even though Ghostface could be very real, especially in that first movie, there's just so much like fun with the teenagers, and all the characters are so like likable and everything. So, and there's so much detail that it makes it so much it gives it so much rewatchability because once you know who the killers are, you can watch it back and get those little tells and all that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And well, my brain turned off for a second. That happens to me from time to time. Yeah, I don't even know what I was going to say to that. I got nothing there. I'm gonna have to come back on that one. That happens to me from time to time.
don't feel bad at all. It happens to me more than I'd like to admit myself, but
Oh gosh. Oh, I was gonna say, I think part of it too, that I got it, it came back, is like when it came out. I don't know what year you were born, but I feel like a lot of times, whatever year you were coming up as like a preteen or teenager, is the horror movies that you kind of have that soft spot for, whether they're good or bad. And Scream was kind of like that for me because I was born in '88, so it's kind of in that time.
hell yeah. No, I was born in 92, so a little bit later, but not too, yeah, pretty close. And it was one of those that by the time it hit like the VHS cycle and stuff, that was when I finally saw it. So, no, it was one of those I might have even seen Scary Movie like right before I saw Scream. So it was kind of
Mhm.
one of those that I was like, now I need to see what this is joking. And
Yeah.
because it was about like 99, 2000 before I think Scream 3 had already been closed out by the time I actually finally saw Scream. But no, it was one. I'd just been so scared of horror movies up until that point. That was the first time I was like, I watched it completely by myself in a bedroom, and afterwards was like, oh, I could watch that again right now. It was so fun. But no, I
Yeah.
am. But heck yeah. Do you have any other favorites of all time, or like anything that's just kind of recent that's really stuck out to you over the years? And it could be, recent like last year, or it could be over the last like decade or so.
Ooh. So when I think of like my favorites of all time, I have like the older ones, like obviously Halloween, The Thing, all the older like 70s, 80s ones. But when I think about what gives me a soft spot for when I was growing up with it, it's like besides Scream, The Faculty,
Oh yeah.
Jeepers Creepers, even though, there's the director's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Um I really like there's a movie called The Voices. It's not from that time and it's not a lot of people have seen it. It has Ryan Reynolds in it and it's ridiculous and it's so good to me. I love that movie. And
That's
more recent. What's that?
I was just gonna say The Voices is one that I remember back when the trailer came out, and I was like, I want to see that. Never watched it, and just
Oh,
recently I saw it again on like Tubi, and I was like, oh, should I finally watch it? I was like, I never heard anything, so now that you recommended it, I'm finally gonna watch it. I've been waiting for like a recommendation because nobody ever talks about it. Like you said, I'm surprised with Ryan Reynolds, but
Yeah, nobody talks about it. And I do feel like it's polarizing because I've shown it to people and they've been like, I don't know about that. But for me, I thought it was great. I remember it was on my letterbox top four for a really long time because I really liked it and it got kind of shuffled out. But I bought it. I have it on physical too because I think it's great.
Oh yeah.
And then I love Scream 3. I'm a Scream 3 defender.
Oh
I
yeah.
also love Halloween H2O. That's my favorite. I know that that's sacrilegious, but I just love Halloween H2O. And then more recently, I love the Terrifier franchise a lot. The Substance, I loved The Substance, Hereditary, Midsummer, all the
Yeah.
big ones that everybody seems to like. I agree.
Oh yeah. No, and I agree with H2O is one of my favorites in the Halloween franchise, probably right behind the original and Halloween 3. And it's mostly, I think it's one of those that all of us Scream fans tend to like that one because, Kevin Williamson wrote it and then it was directed by Steve Miner, who was Friday the 13th Part 2 and stuff. So,
Mhm.
no, they did a good job with like bringing in the slasherness from with Steve Miner, but having the meta-ness that, Kevin Williamson can bring. And same with the faculty, so
I
I'm
love the team.
yeah, that's like pretty much the thing needs like if the thing happened in a high school. So I was like, I'd seen the thing first, and so by the time finally saw the faculty, like way later, because I was late to that was another one that came out about the time I was still scared of horror movies. So the trailer, I was like, fuck that, I'm not watching that. And then so I finally saw it years later as an adult, and I was like, holy crap, this is one of the funnest movies. And now I've seen it like in the double digits. But no, that cast is insane. Everything about that movie is so
The
fun.
cast, yeah, the same because the cast into the crossover with Josh Hartnett, which 30 Days of Night, that's another one.
Oh
Josh
yeah,
Hartnett was so good at that time when he was doing horror. Like a Trap, which recently came out, a lot of people didn't like. And when I first saw Trap, the first time I hated it, and now it's kind of like one of those love to hate it kind of movies, and I've seen it a couple of times because I just love him. And oh, and with H2O, I don't know if you've watched it recently, but I know they had some issue with the score rights. Something happened with the score and if you go to watch it now, it actually has, I believe it's the same score as in Scream 1. So that's another reason I think that a lot of people that like Scream like that. It's because the vibe is so similar. It even has the same music at this point.
yeah. No, yeah, no, I didn't know that. I think last time I watched it was like on a DVD, so it was probably just the old
Okay.
stuff. But yeah, no, hell yeah, I have to check that out and watch like a more up to date streaming version of it or something. But no, no, I love the Terrifier franchise as well. That's one of those things that like again, it just shows that there's a way to do like extreme gore and it not be like so realistic that it's like like I could watch Terrifier 3 way quicker than I could watch Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, you know what I mean? And like
Mhm.
I'm not saying I don't like movies like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, but I got to be in a certain mood where I could sit there and giggle at some of the stuff that happens in Terrifier 3. So no, I love that like hyper violence when in that fun way, you know what I mean? The Substance is another one that goes that crazy and stuff. So no,
Yeah.
I loved all those films that you mentioned, but no, hell yeah. And of course we can dive into some of the hypothetical. Well, I only have like one hypothetical question, but I figure we kind of branch off of some of the movies that we mentioned in that. But my hypothetical question for you is, being that you study all these cases and stuff, has there ever been one that strikes you as like this should be a movie? I know you don't enjoy those types of movies too much, but is there one that you're like, damn, this would make a good one or
I don't know if I would say that because I do not tend to think of them in that way because it is so real. But there
yeah.
are a couple of cases that I've covered that actually have inspired true crime or have inspired horror movies. Like, for example, Jeepers Creepers, the opening scene of Jeepers Creepers was, well, they say it wasn't inspired, but it definitely was inspired by this case of this guy named Dennis Depew who murdered his wife. And when he killed his wife, he went to like get rid of her body, and there was a car following behind him who was playing the license plate game and saw his license plate and remembered it and then saw him putting the body behind a school. So it's very much like it was inspired. They just don't say that it was.
Yeah.
And then Jennifer's Body also was inspired by an actual murder too of a girl named Elise Pauler, I believe was her name. I'd have to look it up to make sure I'm saying it because it's been a while since I've looked into that case. But those were both actual cases that inspired those movies.
Yeah. Now I remember hearing about the Jennifer's Body movie, like that whole case and stuff. And the first one I'm brain farting myself. What was the first movie you mentioned again?
Jeepers Creepers.
Yeah, Jeepers Creepers. I remember they even did like a Unsolved Mysteries episode, and you can go back and watch that like way
Mhm.
before. It's still on YouTube, and it's like very similar to that opening scene. So no, that's crazy. That's one of those movies that and I'm with you. It's like one of those things that, yeah, their director has his, shitty past, but there's so many other people that worked on those movies. And once you've already bought them on DVD, you might as well enjoy the movies. You're not giving anybody else no more money. So, no, I love Jeepers Creepers. I watched those. One and two are great. Of course, everything after that, I'm kind of like, whatever. But that's we had a horror con here in North Carolina called Carolina Fear Fest, and it was they had the Jeepers Creepers truck out like at the event, and they also had the guy that played the creeper, so it was pretty cool. But
That would be pretty cool. I love that. Yeah, I've always loved it. It's been one of my favorites forever. I think it's so fun. I love Justin Long when he does horror. He always picks like the most interesting things to work on. So anytime I see him in something, I'm pretty excited to watch it.
yeah, hell yeah. No, yeah, yeah, he's become a Scream king at this point for sure. He put out like four horror movies in the last year, so.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
But hell yeah. And then when you study cases and stuff like that, if they have movies, do you typically watch them, or do you try to like wait and watch them maybe after you do your episodes so it doesn't mess up any of your like, remembering or anything, or do you watch them before, just to compare, or
Usually if I've come upon the case, I've already seen the movie. There's been a couple of
yeah.
times where it's not, but it's usually more of a documentary. So I'll do it while I'm researching so that because a lot of times I have interviews from people who are actually involved. But in terms of the movies, I don't think there's been one that oh, you know what? No, that's not true. I did cover a case recently, that was not inspired by, but compared seriously to, oh, what is it called? The one with Glenn Close.
Oh,
Fatal Attraction.
yeah.
Fatal Attraction. So there was a case where a woman was killed, and it was compared very seriously to Fatal Attraction. So I did research the case and then watch that movie afterwards just to kind of see, and it was very similar, so I could see where they were coming from.
Oh yeah. Now there's a movie, I don't know if you've seen it, but I recommend it if you haven't. It's based on a true serial killer. His name is Fritz Honka. It's the movie The Golden Glove. Like a German horror movie.
Hmm.
But I highly recommend checking that out, and maybe even the story, because it's like it's one of the few movies that like it's kind of mean, and it's in a way, but it also has like this weird dark humor to it. I don't know. I hate to say I enjoy it because it does have so much meanness to it, but because you like true crime and stuff, it'd be worth checking out the movie to see if it be something that would enjoy, like looking at a case or whatever. But
Yeah, I could do that. You said Golden Glove.
yeah, that's the bar that he goes to. That's why it's called the Golden Glove, because it's like the local German bar or whatever. But hell yeah. But it's also just a movie that I recommend. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
for fans of like true crime and horror stuff like that. But like you said, you don't really like both. But it doesn't. That's the one thing, is it's not so mean that it feels like it almost is one of those things that I watched it and then found out it was real, and I was like, oh shit, like it's dark. It made it
Yeah,
darker.
yeah. Sometimes you can tell. I've noticed that. Like, I don't know. I'm assuming you've seen the Pennywise, the It remakes that came out recently, the last couple of
Yeah.
years. Well, I don't know if you recall. I can't remember if it's the first one or the second one. I think it's the first one. The opening scene, there was like a really aggressive gay bashing. Do you remember that? The
Yeah.
opening scene? I remember watching that and I was like, this feels really mean spirited and random for like the type, because I know like Pennywise is, but he is also so jokester. So I thought that that was odd and it felt so real that I went and I looked into it after the fact, and it turns out it was a real situation that happened that Stephen King had heard about when he was younger. It was a case of this guy named Charlie Howard who was killed in that way.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you can just like the meanness, you can feel that when it comes to a real situation.
Yeah. And what's wild about some of that stuff is like, that scene is so short in the movie, but in the book he goes so into detail with it and stuff.
Mhm.
Like it's like the first like couple like almost 100 pages of the book. So no, it's no, and it's wild that how some of those things, it's almost like a game of telephone, you know what I mean? Like Stephen King wrote about the true thing in his story, and then they decided just to nod to the Stephen King story, not realizing that they were probably not into something so true, you know what I mean? So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I had never heard about it before. It wasn't something people talked about, but it just felt so real that I had to look into it. And when I saw it was, and it's definitely different. Like it actually is much worse than what actually happened because the people who did it were kids. It was like, I can't remember the ages, but they were like maybe like 14 when
yeah.
they did it. So it was just incredibly sad.
No, definitely. And then you also got movies like The Strangers, which are based on a true story, but the true story, all that is that somebody knocked on the director's door that night and asked if somebody was home, and then when they left, they found out that other people in the neighborhood were getting their houses broken into. It's like, but there was like no murder or anything like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
but and the same
Uh,
thing with that movie Pilgrim. I don't know if you ever saw that.
no.
It's a one of those Into the Dark movies on Hulu, and it's about this family that like hires a reenactor that like comes to the house to like do like a Thanksgiving reenactment thing, and they're like
Mm.
it's a pilgrim like mother father and son, and they end up. It obviously goes horror, and apparently it's all based on a true story where the director's mom and dad did that to them for whatever reason. Like
Oh,
they had to spend a weekend with a dude dressed in a pilgrim outfit, like acting like a pilgrim in character and stuff. It was like that's a weird. I guess I could see how such a childhood like traumatic memory probably was like turned into a horror movie for you, but
yeah, it's interesting how people's minds work. I'm always very impressed by people who can be creative in that way.
right, turning a pilgrim stuff into a horror movie, but
Yeah, no, I mean, just like making stories like that. I don't have that in me. I'm not like a creative in that way. So I'm always very impressed to see what people's brains are capable of.
yeah, no, definitely, but hell yeah. No, and then of course, my final question that I like to ask all my guests is, do you have a horror story of your own? You know, it could be, just a, day gone wrong, trying to record or something like that, because I like to get, just people's behind the scenes horror stories, or it could be something in your personal life if you are willing to share that stuff.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I would say I have like an actual horror story. I mean, because I don't want to end on like a downer. Like my friends being killed would be pretty like horrific. That was a
Yeah.
pretty shitty situation. But no, I would just say life in general is kind of a horror story, especially right now with everything going on. Definitely. Like, what is it that Mark Kincaid says in Scream 3 that like his favorite horror movie is just his life?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel. It's just everything right now feels a little bit like a horror movie to me.
No, I know exactly what you mean. It's one of those dystopian futures that you would only think that you'd see in a horror movie at this point. So
It's a bummer right now.
no, definitely. But well, I appreciate you, and we can end on the high note of saying Scream 3 rules. I'm right there with you. That's
Yes, Scream 3 rules. I love Scream 3 so much. Everybody who hates it, you're wrong. It's
right.
so much fun.
I'm a fan of the entire franchise, so it's one of the like the only one I think I really dislike is probably six. I wasn't a huge fan of six, to be honest.
Yeah.
And even then I could rewatch it. I just didn't like it as much because of you know,
The
I
ending was crazy. Let's just be real. Like it was decent enough. Like what they did with Gail's character and made her like regress so hard is kind of like a bummer, but the ending was just insane.
yeah,
It was like it was like they turned into Looney Tune characters. It was very, very odd choices.
yeah, and that's the only one I've seen, and out of all of them, that's like the only one that I've seen where I've guessed the killers. You know what I mean? So, or at least like most of the killers. Like I've 1 through 5, or yeah, 1 through 5. Like I didn't even guess anybody in 5. You know what I mean? So, 4, like literally, yeah, there's not been a single movie where I've guessed the killer up until that one. So it makes it less fun. I feel like when the ending comes around. So that also might
Yeah,
have taken me out of
absolutely.
it. But no, hell yeah, I appreciate you for coming on the show. It was a blast chatting with you. Do you want to remind people where they can find your show and stuff? And of course, I'll
Oh
have the
yes.
link in the description. But
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can search True Crime with Bratterstein anywhere you get podcasts, or if you prefer video. Well, they have video on Spotify too, but it's just Bratterstein on YouTube, and I would love to see you there.
thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun. I don't get enough opportunities to talk about horror because, with what I do, it doesn't really correlate very much, but I love it. It's one of my, if I was to do any other type of content, it would be horror content. I just don't have time. So,
Yeah. No, I definitely feel you there. If you ever want to just chat about more horror, you're welcome to come back on the show. We'll pick a topic or a movie and deep dive into it. So that way it's we're not just repeating the same questions and stuff. But
absolutely. Sounds great.
oh yeah. Well, enjoy the rest of your week and thank you so much for coming on.